Welcome, my beautiful, wonderful listener, to the Talking About Talking podcast, where we talk about everything and anything, and we talk about talking about those things. Today, I am joined by former NHL player Todd Warner. Thank you for joining me today, Todd.
Nice to be here, Chuck. Thank you, buddy.
Yeah, man. So I played hockey. I played from the age of 3 to like 26 until mice ate my hockey equipment. Yeah, right. And my most competitive, I played when I was 11, and I didn't like it. We won OMHA, all of Ontario. I didn't like it. I didn't have whatever it was that's required to like want to be super excellent at a particular thing. I didn't have it in me. I was good, but like I didn't take criticism well, for example. So when coaches were like, hey, when you're out there, you should try not to do this and try not to do that and try to do this different, I didn't see it as like helping. To me, it was them being like, hey, Trevor, you're not doing good enough. But I'm fucking 11, so it's hard for me to, at that time.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So what kind of advice would you have for young kids that are doing well, but are struggling to kind of find their way in the sport like that?
Well, it sounds like you had a good team. If you're able to win all Ontario, I mean, I think the philosophy about that now has changed a lot. And having coached, minor hockey, junior hockey, college hockey, I think, the days of being, kind of a ruthless dictator behind the bench are far gone. And I'm glad, because I've seen it myself and experienced it myself in some respects, I guess. So especially when you're working with an 11-year-old team, I mean, as an 11-year-old player, if you can just understand that nobody has ever played a perfect hockey game, and if you can just say to yourself, well, the coach is only trying to help me learn faster how I can be the best version of myself, and then I think that's a good mindset. So if you're a parent and you're talking to your Adam or Pee Wee age player, and the coach is saying, hey, maybe when the puck comes to you here, think about this, and part of it is just it's the tone. I think, that has changed dramatically in our time in sport, right? So, yeah, I've coached that level. I've tried to use some video to reinforce what you see. And I mean, I always think, and I tell the college kids I coach now and work with, and we have video sessions, and I say, I was probably 13 or 14 before I ever saw myself on film. And that was actually kind of ahead of the time, because we had a parent who would, tape the games in the Blenheim Arena when I was playing Pee Wee or Bantam, right? So I played, half a dozen years of hockey and never had a visual of what I looked like in my gear, just the whole thing. It was just, I can remember it really well. Like, wow, that's how I skate. That's how so until you can use video maybe to reinforce what you're trying to teach a young player, I think it can help them get their head around it. But mostly it's just the way you approach that, and not being critical, but trying to, just reinforce what you're getting across. And if the player can understand that, again, nobody plays perfectly, that we're only trying to get better, then I think it kind of fits in the team concept. If everybody's experiencing that together, then you feel like you're part of something bigger. And so that's a challenge, especially for some coaches my age, who a lot of them are dads, and they're getting back into the sport or sports in general, and they've been coached a certain way. Sometimes that's how they think it should happen. Well, I think we all know that society has changed in a good way.
Yeah. So, that whole bit on like kind of main message you sent about like when you're 11 years old, just remember that not every game's perfect, and you're just everyone's trying to be better, that kind of thing. It's like really thinking about that. It's hard to not get emotional thinking, man, I needed that when I was 11. I needed someone to tell me that.
Some kid, and that's part of it too, is that as you get older, some kids need a kick in the butt. Like that's just part of the thing. Sometimes motivation happens in different ways. And,
yeah.
But when you're on a team, part of it is tying it back to, we need you, we need this, and if you're playing golf or you're playing tennis, an individual sport, then it's a little different. A lot of things hang on you individually, but when it's the collective and you're trying to get to a point as a group, then I think it helps shelter some of that burden, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a good point that like you mentioned with some kids need a kick in the ass, because like my whole life I've needed very, very gentle correction, like from my mom, from teachers, from my partners. Like if I don't get gentle correction, I don't do well with it. And so it's just interesting that you're like, kids need a kick in the ass. And I think some do. And I've never been that kid. And it's got to be so difficult as a coach to know which kids need what kind of correction. Because it's not like you can, like you got a team of people, you got a team of a bunch of different humans. Like how do you properly guide each one based on their own individual needs?
Well, it's hard to know. In minor hockey, I would say that, your start is always from the positive side and encouraging. And, again, like you said, you can play on a good team and be a good player and not have the drive or motivation to kind of see it through. And I was not that kid. Like I wanted to be the best and, not just win. Right. So that's a, and as a coach, when you see that in a kid, you just oftentimes let them be at the front of the line and let them show, and that sort of just generates the sort of enthusiasm and culture you want with your team. Now as kids, it's a little, I think you start from the positive side of it, and then as you come to understand your team and how they play and who's who and the personalities, there's always going to be a few kids that need a little push. That's just the way it is, right? And when you get older, I mean, I sometimes sit down with the kids in college, even in junior, and they want it. They'll say to me, hey, like, if I'm not doing that, you don't be afraid to give me an earful, or they understand they need pushed too. And that's part of the process now, is these kids are a little more self-aware and understand, the motivation behind it. Some nights it's not always there, and don't be afraid to, get on me, push me. Right. So, and the ones, what I found is the higher you go, there's more of them.
Yeah, well, that makes sense, because if you develop that kind of awareness of that you need correction, that you need other eyes, you need to be able to see your faults through other people, then that's the kind of thing that's going to make you better.
Yeah, and the more of them you have, they're self-motivated in some ways to other kids, but they also know like they need corrected and they need to, be accountable to the team, and that's part of as they get older and wanting to be, wanting to play at higher levels and push themselves, then they recognize that and they kind of govern each other in some respects. I got 22 4-year-old guys that are on any given college team. There's a half a dozen, maybe 10 even, that can play pro if they want somewhere. So they recognize they're right there. And, what's the next step? Who am I going to be? How am I going to, be part of the solution? All those things that, you want good teams to have. And so sometimes it takes on a mind of its own, and your leadership sort of just governs the group, and you're just there to kind of steer them in the right way. And that's fun to see that happen on a team. I look forward to, you kind of lay the foundation in the fall, and by Christmas it's taken a mind of its own. And then at the end of the year, you're just opening the door. That's really what at that level, at least the goal is from year to year, right? So
yeah, what was that like for you? How you like? Because I mean, there's not a lot of people that have been in the NHL. There's a small amount of the human population that have experienced that, right? So like, what's that like? That transition from playing minor hockey and then moving up and then moving up and then eventually getting drafted.
Well, it happened fast, in some ways for me, because I was playing here. I was playing in Blenheim, small town, and at the time there's no internet, there's no way to really measure yourself against kids your age, right? So I was playing we played B hockey here. We had a lot of good teams and great coaching. We were lucky, to be honest, but I played a year ahead most of my time all the way through. So we're playing B hockey, and we would play Chatham and we would play Windsor.
What do you mean when you say a year ahead?
So I was born in 74. I played mostly with 73. So I played mixed hockey.
Okay.
But I would play, like, say, as an 11-year-old, I played with the 12s and 13. And then the next year I would play as an 11-year-old just with the 11s and 12s. So I kind of just shuffled a year ahead with a group of 73 born players, all who were lots of good players. And so by the time I got to Bantam or midget, I played. The last year of Bantam, we went to the finals and lost. And then I played some midget games. I played some junior C games here in town as a, 14, 15-year-old. And then I went to junior B. But I mean, we played a little bit of spring hockey the year. So like 13, 14-year-old year. So I had an idea, like, we played some Toronto teams, we played some London teams, we played some teams mostly, Southwestern Ontario, like AAA level spring hockey. And I mean, we played 4 tournaments in 2 years, so you're not really seeing everyone, and we did good. We had some good players locally. We put a team together mostly of just Chatham Kent, and we were competitive. And so that was sort of the first eye opener that, wow, there's, that team's from Toronto. They won all Ontario. That team's from Ottawa, whatever. Team's from Chicago. So you feel like, yeah, I'm a decent player in this age group. This is my own age group. I've been playing, largely ahead of the older kids. So, and then I went to junior B. It seemed like a huge step. Like I was playing Bantam most of the year, and then I went to junior B camp, mini camp, like this time of year. Then got invited back to the main camp. So I was it sort of just happened fast. I'd make a Chatham team at that time that was stacked, and we were, we went to the finals. That's the year that Brian Wiseman set the scoring record in junior B, and I was just a bit player, young guy. We had, half a dozen guys that got drafted, half a dozen guys got scholarships, and then and then next thing I know, I'm a first round pick in the OHL. So I go from Bantam whirlwind season at junior B right into Windsor, and so. Yeah, and then it just happens. It happens fast. I had a coach who loved me. We were a rebuilding team. I got to play a lot as a rookie in the OHL, which is hard to do now.
Why is that hard to do now?
Well, it's just such a big jump. The players are. It's an older league. I just think the quality of the 19, 20-year-old juniors now. That difference between a 16-year-old rookie in the OHL and a 19-year-old third-year guy is a huge, just in terms of your development. It's a big step. It's hard. So you have to be elite in some ways and mature physically, mentally to be able to do that.
Well, you gotta be confident. You gotta have a little bit of bravery too to be able to. Put the wheels on.
But you need a coach too that believes in you, and oftentimes, like my situation, we were a rebuilding team. We didn't have a whole lot of depth. And so I'm kind of thrust into a top 6 role that a lot of players like me that age in the league weren't. And so we sort of turned things around quick. I played with a guy named Corey Stillman, who was also in the same boat. He played a lot too as a rookie. And we kind of came in together, pushed each other to be better. And then, a year later, we're lining up for the draft. So yeah, a lot of things, again, it's not a new story. A lot of things have to happen in your way. But I did work at it. I did spend time in the gym. We used to work out when we were Bantams. I knew, my mom was a skating coach. My dad was a former player. So I had the background. I was always around the rink. I loved to play other sports and work hard, and there's a gym rat and all those things. So I guess you'd say that's the trajectory of a kid that does that, but we still weren't as aware as people are now. Like we've been talking about Connor Bedard for 4 years, and we knew Connor McDavid when he was a peewee, and that just wasn't the way then. And we didn't know who you were up against until that list came out my junior B year in Chatham. And I was in the middle of rated in the 6th round or something. I didn't have any idea where I stood in the whole scheme of things, right? So kind of comes at you fast, and then you're front and center for the next 18 months, right? So yeah, so it was a bit of an adjustment. I was glad I could do it here. And I was at home. I played in Chatham. I played in Windsor. My family's around, my friends. It was sort of like, to move away. I look back on it now, and I know a lot of the kids that did, and some of them are still my friends that had to move at a young age, and it's that would have been. I'm not sure I was old enough or ready for that to be like, and I played everywhere since, but I was older and a little more, aware of the world around us and where I was headed, but as a 15, 16-year-old to have to pick up and pack and move across the country, that would have been hard for me. For sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then that transition from like the OHL compared to the NHL. Like that's got to be weird, right? Because I mean, even if I'm looking at your stats, you're like 90 to 91, you're scoring 36 goals, 57 games. Next year, 41 goals, 50 games. And then like in the NHL, 7 goals in 57 games, 12 goals in 75 games. Like
don't look too close. Okay?
Well, no, I mean, but like really though, it's because you're playing with the best in the world all of a sudden, right? Like, well, the best in North America. And so like, how does that feel when you're going from being like basically a rock star in a pretty big pond in the OHL to all of a sudden you're in the NHL and it's like, okay, now shit's the realest it can get. Like, how does that feel?
Well, I'll say this. It was nice to have. So if you see in my bio, I had a year where I played with the national team. So there, back in that
Canadian national team.
There was a Canadian men's national team that played every year. So there was a amateur tournaments all over Europe. Now, when the Olympics starts, is really when you see the Olympic representative from Canada is now NHL players, and it's like best on best. This is what everybody's asked for. But my time, there was an actual Canadian men's team that trained out of Calgary and played in all these European tournaments. And that's what they did. So we would play exhibition games against some American League teams or NHL teams before in the preseason. And then we would go to Europe and play in like a German tournament or a Swedish tournament or a Russian tournament. And so we'd make trips back and forth to Europe while training in Calgary. So that was the men's national program. And it existed for 30 years until 96 when it changed to NHL competition. So that the men's program dissolved at that time because the NHL wanted to take the best to the Olympic Games. And so really that was this incentive for the national team, was that if you played on the men's national team and you stuck it out for maybe a year, 2, even 3 years, you'd get a chance to maybe play in an Olympic Games. And so I got to play in the 94 Olympics in Lillehammer, Norway. So I joined that team, the Canadian national team, after my first training camp in Quebec. So I went to Quebec, my second training camp, in Quebec. I went to training camp. I was close. I'd signed a contract, and they're like, why don't you spend a year there rather than go back to junior? Because that would have been my 4th year of junior. So I had a transition year. It was playing against pros, or playing against men, playing against club teams in Europe. You're playing against, pro teams at home. And, you see the travel and the demands of that, lots of practice, all that. So it was really good for me, I think, to sort of transition to that. But coming to the NHL, you forget, so I'll tell the story in a minute. We were talking about Cliff Fletcher and how he, just kept trading for me for some reason. but it just, I was part of a big trade to come to Toronto, right after I'd been drafted by the Quebec Nordiques, and thrust into a team that was twice to the conference finals, a good veteran team that played a certain way under a coach in Pat Burns. So yeah, it was an eye-opener, and even an eye-opener between what I'd seen in Quebec, which was a rebuilding, struggling, franchise time, and then coming to Toronto, where it was, the center of hockey, Pat Burns coach team, media demands. It was a different animal for sure.
How long were you in Quebec?
Well, I got drafted. I went to 2 training camps, and my second training camp, they sent me to the national program where I played there the whole year. So you'll see at the end of that year, I played some games in Cornwall, which was the minor league affiliate for Quebec at the time. So, and then that team shortly thereafter was in Colorado, right? So they moved. When you get, come to Toronto with a big trade, Matt Sundin, I was in the Matt Sundin for Wendell Clark trade. There's some pressure. So I remember thinking, wow, I gotta, and this is a Pat Burns coach team. I'd watched this team and the way they played. They were old school grind and played hard on the walls. They were heavy and tough, and that's how they played. So I recognized pretty quick when you go to camp how good even the role players are. You have Doug Gilmour and you have Matts and you have all these players that are Kirk Muller, guys that were, been to Stanley Cup finals and won Stanley Cups. And so it was like, how am I gonna get my foot in the door and play regularly? I'm not sure I'm going to walk in here and run the power play. That was pretty apparent right away. Oh, what else can I do to get into the lineup and stay in the, that's really, there's players, I talked about this many times. There's players who decide, nope, this is how I play. And if they don't like me, then that's their fault. And you don't know their names, most of them. You know what I mean? Some guys stick it out and they find a niche to get a place to play, and they can make a go of it for a period of time. But 90% of us have to adapt and figure out a way to be useful in an NHL environment, because it's a competitive one and there's lots of good players. Decide, well, do I want to be stubborn and stick to what got me here, or am I going to alter my game, add elements to be better?
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Like I was totally thinking that's kind of where you were going to go with that, is that like whatever you were doing before just wasn't going to work once you were in that new environment.
Well, it wasn't enough.
Yeah.
It wasn't enough and Pat made it, you know, like we talk about old school coaches, like Pat would say to me, hey, listen, if you don't do these two things better, there's no way you're playing for me. That was basically it. So I'd be like, okay, you know, I want to play here.
Yeah.
You know, again, being from where we are, I mean, it was a huge thrill to be a Leaf. And, you know, so I wasn't gonna be stubborn. And so I just said, well, okay, I'll hit more. I'll win faceoffs. I'll check. I'll do whatever you need me to do. Because in junior, in large part, like I came in as a freshman, like a rookie, and it was like skate and shoot, do your thing, you know, like go. There was no grace period to adapt. It's you know, throw you into the fire. So that was new, and so I learned. You know, it took me a little while to adapt, I guess, and I got hurt a couple of times early, which didn't help either. But yeah, I mean, there's only a handful of players who can come in and, especially as teenagers, and make an impact in the National Hockey League. I mean, I would say, and I don't know, this isn't a slight on today's game at all, because I love it, but it's easier in some respects now, because in our time it was such a physical game.
Yeah.
So we weren't willing to get in there and be strong and heavy and on the puck. It was difficult. You couldn't just fly around. There was always somebody ready to reel you in and knock you down, right?
Yeah.
So as a, you know, 6'1", 180-pound guy, like I knew I needed to get stronger for one. And
which is funny, because like there's a lot of sports where you say 6'1", 180, and that's a big dude. But in hockey, that's really not top of the pack for size.
Maybe now there's players now that's the difference. Like at 185 pounds in the NHL now, you can get space, and if you can skate and you're, you know, quick and agile, you find space and you know, do well. But back in the day, people used to hold on to you, hook and ride, and you know, that was the big difference, was you had to really fight for space. So so if you weren't of a certain ilk, at least, or heavy and strong enough, it was hard to find any room. And so, you know, a player like Doug Gilmour, or a player like, you know, Matt Sundin, his size and range, you know, Doug was just so smart, so good, that he could find space and make plays. I wasn't good enough. I knew that right away when I watched Doug at the first practice. So it was like, well, what am I going to bring that's going to enable me to stay in the lineup, win over the coach, and be useful, right? So
yeah. So how does that work? First, like when you said at the first practice, you could tell just by looking at Doug that he was just so good. And then you were like, oh shit, I can't do what he's doing. What can I do? Like, what is that? How does that all play out? What is it that he's doing that you feel like you can't do? And what is it that you decided on that you were going to lean into to provide value?
Well, I mean, Doug Gilmour was, you know, where do you start? He was just such a competitor. I mean, he was tough. And you talk about being of a certain weight, like he was 170 pounds, but he was tough as nails. He was, you know, so skilled, gifted with the stick, and you know where he was on the ice. Yeah, not a big guy, not a top flight skater, but just real, you know, and an engine that you just don't see. People don't play that hard that long. You know, and so, you know, you're watching that every day, and the work ethic and you know, just his ability to come through when you needed him. Yeah, like, not that I didn't think I could get there one day, but it wasn't going to be that immediate. So, you know, it's a matter of like, I'm in the NHL, and yes, I'm maybe in and out of the lineup, but what else can I do to, you know, part of it I think is, and I talk to kids about this. What does our team need? You know, like what you have to be able to sort of take a 1,000-foot view of, you know, here's our team. They've been in the conference finals twice. You know, what can I provide that's going to put them over the top? You know, and so I'm not going to be playing on Doug's left wing. So, you know, there's going to be some depth positions that are going to be, you know, fought for. How can I best get my foot in the door there? So, I mean, I playing on the wall, being physical, face-offs, all the sort of small things you hear now, you know, that players bring intangibles were also part of the game then. Part of it was getting stronger. I spent a lot of time in the weight room, like I did. And in some respects, I think that was maybe not the best. Rushing it to get heavier wasn't a great idea. You, as a gym guy, would know, like I probably got big faster than I needed to, but I thought I needed it, and they did too. So that was just a sign of the times.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a lot of things that ultimately, like I'd say now, like I wouldn't have played 10 years in the league if I didn't, or I wasn't told, or wasn't said, hey, hey, Todd, you got to do these things to play regularly and be a reliable guy and a guy we can trust as a coach. If I didn't know that right away and no one was willing to tell me that, then in my 9th, 10th, 15th years of professional hockey, I don't know if I'm still playing, because all those things are what kept me in the game.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right? Because I never scored more than 13 goals in a year. And it was a different time. It was harder to score. It was the dead puck era, a lot of checking, a lot of trapping. But still, it was hard. So I recognized, well, I mean, there's only going to be 4 goals in this game tonight. Maybe. So, what else can I do to prevent, or, that's just getting your mind around the fact that, yeah, there's lots of good players. Do I think I can get to that level at some point down the road? Hopefully. But in the meantime, I'm going to do the A, B, and C to stay here.
Yeah. And earlier you mentioned Cliff Fletcher.
Yeah. Yes.
So you said he traded for you multiple times?
Yeah. So it actually, I'd seen, watched Cliff from afar, and obviously he was running the Leafs when I was traded there. But it's a good story because I didn't really know him other than I watched what he did in Calgary and had a presence and, was just a great manager in the league and did a lot of things. So when I was in Lillehammer for the Olympics, I was playing. And so I'm on the ice, and I think it's a game against either the Slovaks or the French. I'm not sure. But my mom and dad came. So Cliff was there. He was in Lillehammer, and it'll come together at the end. But he finds out where my parents are. Okay. So I'm on the ice playing, and he comes and shuffles in behind my parents at the game.
And this is at the Olympics.
This is at the Olympics in Lillehammer. So my mom and dad are sitting there, and Cliff comes up and says, Mr. and Mrs. Moore, I'm Cliff Fletcher. And dad, to hear my dad tell it was hilarious, because he was just like, oh, all of a sudden Cliff Fletcher is over my shoulder. And he starts talking to mom and dad about me and just saying, hey, we're really fond of Todd, and we're going to try and make a play to get him. So circling back, my agent was Don Meehan. Okay. And Don Meehan was a Toronto guy from Newport Sports Management, and they still exists to this day, and was also Wendell Clark's, and was also Cliff Fletcher's agent, and was lots of the Leaf guys current day, present time were his clients. So that's how they made the connection. Donnie had talked to Cliff. Cliff said, I'm going to go to the Olympics, so you got to meet with the Warners. Anyway, so long story short, my junior coach, Motor City Smitty with the Windsor Spitfires, was also an ex-Leaf and was also a Newport Donnie Meehan client, and also knew Cliff Fletcher. So there was a small little hockey world there. So Dad doesn't tell me. He's like, hey, listen, Cliff sat down behind us. I find this out later when I get home in May. Cliff sat down behind us and said, we're really interested. We're going to try and make a deal to bring him to Toronto. Right. So my mom and dad were like, wow, didn't expect to hear that here. Right. So I finished the Olympics. I'm actually hurt. I end up playing in the minors a little bit. I come home, and it's in June, and there's a local kid named Chris Allen who was available for the draft. This is in 1994 now, spring. And so dad says to me, hey, I was meaning to tell you about running into Cliff Fletcher at the Olympics. Right. So this is the first time hearing of it, 8 weeks later. He says, yeah, they're going to try and make a deal. So about 3 weeks later, the draft is in June. We drive uptown to my granddad's house because he's the only one that has TSN at the time. So TSN wasn't, there was no cable, right? Yeah. So you didn't have TSN unless you're in town. So we drive to my grandpa's house to watch the draft, to see Chris Allen, local boy, get drafted. And so literally I can remember it. We're walking into my granddad's house and turn the TV on, and they're talking about this trade that's going down on the floor as the draft is starting. And it's between Quebec and Toronto. And so Dad and I look at each other like, wow, is this what you're talking about? Like, this is the trade. So keep in mind, this is February when Cliff Fletcher sits down behind my parents in Lillehammer. Mm-hmm. So they've already been working at this all spring long. So yeah, they announced this trade, and I'll never forget it. We didn't even watch the rest of the draft. I got traded right there at the start of the draft in the Sundin for Clark trade to Toronto.
That's awesome.
And, yeah. So then, of course, I go to Toronto. I played a number of years. Later, I get traded to Tampa, but Cliff had already gone there as well. Cliff had been a part of the management group in Tampa. So he'd left Toronto at the time when I was playing there, and was in Tampa as like a senior advisor or something. And they'd already traded for Freddie Modine, and then they traded for me, and they traded for Mike Johnson. So Cliff traded for me again in Tampa. 3 years later, I guess he's in Phoenix. He trades for me again. So So the joke was, without Cliff, I don't even have a career. So the story of him sitting down with my parents
Yeah.
at the games, and then months later it all coming to fruition was crazy. And so I'm secretly glad I didn't know at the time, because I would have obviously I was 20 years old, and it would have been a lot to process, thinking I'm finishing my time here with Quebec because Toronto's trading for me.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, that's how that went down, and so I don't know if that would be considered tampering at this point, in hockey, but it was cool to find out that later, and that my dad and mom were pretty thrilled to know.
Yeah. Well, so when you were an NHL player, there's like a certain amount of spotlight that's on you. I really wonder, first of all, what was that like? Because you're going to have a certain amount of like criticism and scrutiny and stuff coming out of media and everything like that. And I mean, all kinds of sources, because again, you're in the spotlight. And then how do you think that must be like for players now with social media?
Yeah, I'm not sure how much, you got to have thick skin, clearly, even to get to the level. But, there's a podcast about talking, like, for me, it was like, I wasn't really one to seek out the media attention. Like I tell kids now, like, if you'd have told me in my 30s or 40s, I'd be on TV talking about hockey, or like, I wouldn't have thought that. Like I wasn't a public speaker or someone that was like, hey, let's get the camera on me, right? So yeah, there was pressure. I mean, I feel like back then, I tell people this, like the media traveled with you, right? So it was less cutthroat, like because they had to sit on the plane and look you in the eye every time you wrote an article about whoever it may be, right? It was like a bit of dialogue. We were friendly with the guys that covered the team, and now they travel on their own. They can post and say whatever privately, like what social media does. So I feel like it's just not as intimate as it was. Like it was kind of like they were on our side. They were going to spin it in the right way, and we were going to work together to put the story out, right? But now I feel like everybody's trying to angle for their best story, and it's often at the expense of the player or his family. And so I don't necessarily like it, and I'm not sure how much I would take in if I were playing today. I'm not sure I'd be on social media, and I understand these guys have their platforms and everything to put out what they want. We did get media training, and then it was mostly about, putting your own spin on it, however you want. Like it was, regardless of the question or the tone of it, like you can talk about the power play, so, and that's good advice for kids, I think. But yeah, I don't know if it's quite the family kind of vibe that I felt in Toronto. But yeah, there was a lot of media, but I think most of them would greet you from day to day pleasantly, and whether it was a great article or a great story they had about you that particular day, at least you could look each other in the eye and say, okay, I know you're trying to do your job, I'm trying to do mine, thanks, whatever. And now it's easy to hide behind whatever device, right? So
we talked to, you mentioned this is a podcast about talking. Very excellent observation. And the talking that happens, the communication that happens with you as a coach now that you're in a coach role, compared to what you heard from coaches when you were playing, how is that different?
Well, let me think. Obviously, when you play at the highest level, you quickly understand it's a business, right? And there's also a whole number of players underneath you who are trying to take your job, right? Because it is a job. And so that becomes apparent pretty fast when you go to camp. There's 60 guys, and you can see there's about a dozen that are right there ready to knock on the door and take a job somehow, right? So in college, your team is largely your team. Now, I'll say there's some extra players around on every college team. There'll be, if you can play 20 in a given night, there's always a half a dozen extra bodies. So players that aren't playing and trying to get in, want to know why, want to get better and get their foot in the door. But, the difference now is, I think, in light of all the video that you can access at every level of hockey, I got a bug flying around, sorry, is that the players want to see what it is you're telling them they need to do. So let's say we have a defenseman who's a 7D, he's in and out of the lineup, and I say, hey, listen, we got 2 offensive guys ahead of you. I need you to just rein it in a little bit, make a good first pass, defend hard, and get the puck up to the forwards, whatever, simple. And they want to say, okay, show me where I haven't done that. Show me where I haven't done that as to why I'm not playing. And so then it's like, okay, well, you bring them in the room and you say, okay, here's a small detail, let's clean this up. You don't have to make the extra play. You don't have to beat people one-on-one, whatever it may be. And so they want evidence.
Mhm.
And I think that starts pretty young now because they're videoing games in Adam and Pee Wee, right? So these kids come in to junior with sometimes 3-4 years under the belt of video, and they've seen themselves and they know what they can and can't do. And they know, when you're saying A to them, they want evidence as to the fact that really is happening. So I have lots of chats with players who are playing regularly and doing really well. Keep doing this, keep that up. Hey, listen, when the power play does this, let's think about these things, whatever it may be. And then most of the hard talk is with the players who want more or aren't in, and giving them actual, video evidence of what they can do to better their chances. And ultimately, as assistant coach, which I've been in college, that's your job. Your job is to smooth the message, keep everybody on the boat rowing in the same direction, and give them tangible evidence what can work for them to play more. And that's really what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I like, because sometimes it's hard. Sometimes I say to them, listen, you're playing exactly how I want you to play, but we got some bodies ahead of you. That's just the numbers game, right? Part of it. It's like, I wouldn't change a thing you're doing, but you see what our left side looks like right now. We got a lot of good players. So don't get sit, your time will come, and I'll go to bat for you to get you in the lineup, because as an assistant coach, it's not your lineup to choose generally. So you're trying to smooth that over, and that's part of the psychological game of having a team and you want guys to push each other and want to improve individually, but you also want them to know that they're part of the solution. They're not getting in the way. And that's sometimes hard for a kid that age who's had a lot of expectations and has done well in the past, right?
Yeah. So when it comes to coaching, when you first started coaching early on, what kind of, because the majority of coaching is just communication. That's almost all of what it is, right? So what kind of mistakes did you make with your communication at the beginning of your coaching that you've since fixed?
Well, I think the big thing was getting to understand the video, like the video component of it now has changed. I mean, even since I stopped playing, I mean, some of the platforms that you can access for video now are incredible, and you can isolate players. We recruit players, and we can go back and watch their shifts from 4 years ago and just see the trajectory of their development and whatever. So I think the first thing I had to do was, I feel like my experience alone in a college room or a junior room will carry a little bit of clout. Now, but I also think the players, like we talked, are much more shrewd in their own, identity. They know who they are. They've seen themselves. They understand what they do well. You can't say to a top end skater, you're not fast enough. They're like, no, I can skate. Like, they know who they are and what they do well. So I think the first thing I thought was I needed to become more equipped to understand the video component, how I can use it to reinforce what I'm trying to say, right? Because I had no idea. I'd never done a video meeting. Like, I'd done meetings, just chatting and getting our heads together and whatever else with players I played both on the teams I was on and coach. But accessing the video and be able to say, hey, listen, this is the stuff we're talking about. So let's just clip 40 seconds, keep that on your phone, and this is what I'm talking about. Talk to you next week or whatever, So yeah, that was the big thing, because there was so many of them. I'd been to coaching seminars and they would introduce these ideas to me, these new platforms for video, and I had to kind of pick and choose what I wanted. Every league or coach, wherever you coach, has a different platform in some respects. So you're forever sort of relearning some of these platforms and how to use them best with your team. And so that was the thing I probably knew the least about, to be fair. And then as you get in it, you think you need to accumulate all this data and info and stats and all this stuff. And again, eventually it always circles back that you need to speak to people and be concise and not cloud the message, which is a hard thing for coaches now, because there's so much information out there. Is trying to eliminate what's not necessary and just really get to the point of what you're trying to get across, whether it's an individual meeting or a power play meeting or a group meeting, whatever it may be. That's a challenge. And that's a challenge we have too, because we have lots of data lots of data on how we play and what we do well and what we could improve on. And even in game, there's all this stuff we're looking over, charts and paperwork and numbers. And I think, well, what do we really need to narrow down to really deliver to the team best? And that's a hard thing, because lots of, in the higher leagues now, there's a half a dozen coaches. There's guys in the back room collecting stuff. They're sending things all the time. I think it's just important to be able to eliminate what's not really necessary at that point and really focus down on what you need. And that's a challenge now, because it's almost become oversaturated with data.
Yeah, that makes sense. When it comes to the coaching and the NHL and everything, so how many kids do you have, Todd?
I got 4.
Yeah.
Grateful Dad.
Yeah.
Grateful Dad.
Nice. It's a good shirt. I like it. I noticed.
I got 4. 3 girls
and a boy.
And your sister coaches my daughters in dance.
Dance. Okay. Yeah. So how is your boy the oldest?
No, Ava, my oldest is Ava. She's going to be 20 next week. She's in Ottawa.
Okay.
University of Ottawa. Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything that you learned through hockey or through coaching or anything like that you found helped translate into being a better dad?
Oh, well, I did coach Sam's team, but I found it hard. Because you want what's best for your son. You want them to have the same sort of passion for the sport that you chose. And in some respects, he's a bit like you. He enjoyed everything equally, and he played hockey, and he played it at a high level, still does. But he also liked basketball, and he also liked track, and he also liked volleyball, and so we didn't discourage him at all. But I mean, to say he was all in on hockey when he was 10, 12, when I was coaching him, he wasn't. He was ready to go play baseball, and he was ready to go play. And really, I was that kid too, I guess, because I did all the sports, and I think it helps. I think it's a good thing to do.
Yep.
To turn him off it. But I would say, yeah, I mean, as far as making me a better dad, it comes back to communication again. And I probably, when I first came home and started to get into coaching, I'm not sure I would be where I am now. I wish I would, where I am now, 15 years ago when my kids were young and little, I wish I were there then. Because I did, I was fresh off playing. I'd come home from Europe. I was sort of just, trying to get my head around what the hockey culture environment looked like here again, because I'd been away for 6 years. So that was, I think, again, the biggest thing for me would be after you have all this information and you have, a plan and you have a practice this and you want to work on these skills and that's really what I did when I got home. Ultimately, it's how best you get that point across. And that comes from communication and tone and encouragement and all those things. So it doesn't matter what level you're coaching at, you have to have that, I think, because players learn differently. Players learn visually. We're learning all this too. Players learn visually. So I have a platform where I design drills, and I can actually put a camera on the player's helmet and run through a drill where they can see themselves perform a drill. And it's been really useful for 8, 10, 12-year-old kids. So, and even our college kids.
But you don't do that to your kids. You don't put a camera on their head and then this is what you did wrong around the house.
If I'd had that platform 10 years ago, I would love to have used it for my son. Yeah. And just see, so he could see himself. Because, these kids are all, this is the video game era.
Yeah.
This is how they absorb things. So, yeah, that maybe, again, it just comes back to, communication and how best to get your point across. And if I knew then what I know now, I guess I probably would have been better. Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned like coming back from Europe and everything. I was wondering how that was, like that transition from being top tier athlete to regular life. What is that? How does that feel? Because I mean, there's, especially with a sport like hockey, it's just so fast paced. It's so intense. And like you said, it was a lot more rough of a game back then. And so you got this high risk of injury as well. And it's like every time you step out on the ice, you could get your freaking head taken off and you got a job to do and it's go, go, go. And so like the amount of adrenaline and focus you're going to need from a day to day with your hockey player lifestyle, and then moving on to, okay, I'm a dad now. And you don't have to be wired so tight. What is that like, that transition?
Well, thankfully, I had something to do right away. I'm going to plug you in here, bud.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when I first finished, we bought a rink in Chatham, and that's when I first started to do the skill development stuff, right? So I had something to do right away. Sorry.
So good.
And so I just, yeah, thankfully I had something to do, and I just poured all my energy we renovated a rink, and we put down the synthetic ice. We had basically a half arena and a shooting pad and a ramp. So I was literally, when I retired, I was playing in Germany in Cologne. I mean, we bought this place 3 weeks later. So that's that May, June, I just poured my energy into fixing this place up, getting it ready. And then we started to run camps in the summer. So I didn't really have like, honestly, I was still involved in the game. I was still teaching it. I enjoyed the coaching part of it. I did have, once I got home, I started coaching junior a little bit in my son's team, and I did have some to learn. I think, like, I feel like, having been in Europe, I'd missed out on, I played for a couple of Canadian coaches, and we had, lots of good ideas, and I guess I was still learning about the game and some strategy and things as I finished playing. But once you come back and you start to watch closer and you talk to coaches at higher levels and you go to some of these coaching seminars, I think you see how quickly things evolve, right? And so I felt like just being away from Europe, I missed some of that, right? So you kind of sink back into the culture here in Canada and the hockey, and you sort of like, wow, like that's different from when I left, or that's a new idea. So you kind of just get your head around that. But ultimately, I was just skill development strictly was what I was doing. And that's the part I enjoyed most, because we'd run hockey schools and I'd been doing things on the side as a player all the way through. So I felt like I had a great setup, had a great facility. I could teach, and we ran soccer and other things in the off season at that place, a hockey station. So yeah, I mean, we were ready to come home. Like, to be honest, like I could have played a couple other places. I was considering actually maybe even going to Asia to play. I had a friend that was running a team in the British League in Belfast that we talked about going. But, we had 3 kids. They were, 7, 5, and 4. And we're like, like maybe it's time. And when you play in Europe, you're home now, right? Like the seasons are winding down now. And so every year we came home and we put the kids in school here. So the last, 6, 8 weeks of every school year, our kids are in school in Blenheim, and then we would go back to Europe in the fall, right? So I think, they were comfortable coming back, and they knew people at school. The teachers were real accommodating. It was easy, really. So then it was like, well, we're going to pick up and move to a different place again. Like, we'd already done it 3 times, right? So it's just time. And you talked about just the injury, and yeah, I just had a bunch of things. I had an ankle problem. At the very end, I got what basically was whiplash. I went to hit someone, and I just jarred my sternum and separated shoulder and collarbone, all kinds of things. So it was just time. It was April, May. I could hardly lay down. I'm like, I had to rehab for 3 more months to get ready and go in August again. And I thought, well, it's just time to stop, right? So
yeah, because it sounds like you had new sense of purpose to transition to, right? And I'm just wondering if you had any, like, or if you recall afterwards having any kind of lingering feeling of like the excitement of it all, like a gladiator that no longer goes into the ring, like, because that's what these kind of sports are, is our modern day gladiators, is these warriors going in and doing this thing that's high intensity, high risk of injury, go, go, go.
Yeah, I talk to players. I never really, I don't know, I guess I got it out of my system. Like I tell people, I play hockey. I still like to, I play in some charity events and some Leaf alumni things. And part of it is just great to give back to the community and raise money, whatever it may be. But part of it also is just to connect with guys I haven't seen that I played with, and that's really true. And so, do I miss the competition? There probably was a stretch off and on there when your body feels better. I know I can say, like, I went to play in a men's tournament over in Asia and felt great. I hadn't played a lot of hockey, but I was in relatively good shape because I was on the ice every day working with kids, and you're not, you're not hitting and being physical and all the things you have to be when you play. So my body probably recovered in the first few years after I was done better than it had in years, right? But no, I don't really miss it. I like to see my friends, and I like people joke like it's like when you're on the bus or the plane or in the dressing room, that's the stuff you miss. I mean, do I miss some of the guys I played against? No, they were a nightmare to play. So no, I mean, but I honestly, I'd love to play. I'll always play. I just like the camaraderie of it and getting together with friends to do it. But the tooth and nail battles back in the day and putting my body to that again, I don't know. I'm not now. Like
Yeah.
you see me work out. You see me work out. It's an executive workout now.
Yeah. Actually, I've been meaning to mention your mom gave me skating lessons when there was a time when I was a kid that my mom recognized that I was struggling with hockey and I was losing confidence. So she paid for one-on-one skating lessons for me. And ever since then, I was always the fastest guy on the ice. I could probably go to any kind of league around here that'll take the average adult male and outskate almost everyone else. I can't hit the net worth shit, but I'm fast as hell.
And you're just like me, buddy.
Yeah,
just like me.
it's all thanks to your mom. Is there anything that you recall from your career that was like a particular role model or a coach or another player or someone that stood out that you found really beneficial to your experience as a hockey player?
Ooh, wow. That's so, as far as someone as a role model, or someone I aspired to be, I always said we would say Mark Messier, but Mark Messier was, I mean, he was just a beast, right? He could skate, he was physical, he could score, he was a great leader, hungry, just a consummate pro, a guy I think a lot of players looked up to. I mentioned, as far as just someone that has an impact on your career, Cliff. If I don't come to Toronto and I don't make the connections with the likes of Brad Smith, my coach in Windsor, and I knew Wendell through Brad, my coach of the Spitfires, before I was ever in the trade with him, right? So my agent, the connections through the people in Toronto, like if I don't, if Cliff Fletcher isn't part of that first, half a dozen years of my career, I'm not sure how it goes, right? Because I was hurt a lot. I had bad knees and blew a shoulder out, had a quad injury, all in the first sort of 3 years of my career, right? So Cliff sort of, I'd get healthy, and I'd spend my summers in Toronto working out with Chris Broaders, who was a Leaf therapist at the time. It was great with sort of nursing me back to health, like injury after injury. So if I don't have those people in my court, I'm not sure, who knows? I don't know. Like, I was a first round pick, but I was hurt a lot too. And so I didn't always play regularly or play well. And so I think you need those kind of people who, despite the way it looks, still have your best interests, right? So, clearly my parents, you talking about my mom's skating background obviously was a huge part of me getting there. We did all the camps and power skating and things as kids here. And my dad was heavily involved in the minor hockey program and helping with coaches. And so, yeah, I mean, as far, and as far as the teammate, I would say Mike and I always joke, like we played just about everywhere together. Like, we played, he came from Bowling Green in Toronto in my third year, and we played together in Toronto. And then I went to Tampa in fall. He came in the spring the same year. We played a whole other year together. We spent some time in Phoenix together. And then later on at the end of our career, we played together in Germany. Right. So,
oh, nice.
So yeah, he'd be a teammate as far as, a guy I spent the most time with, stood up in his wedding, great guy, nice family. I really, really enjoyed being around Mike. And then we were lucky enough to go everywhere, in the prime of our lives, right? So it's a good run. Freddie Modine was the guy who lived in my building. We also got traded to Tampa together. He had a great career. Yeah, I mean, those are the guys that we talked earlier, like when I play in these games, Heart and Stroke, Hockey for Homeless, whatever it may be, it's great to, be visible in the community and be charitable and look after that side of it. But it's also cool to run into guys you haven't seen. And that's what, that's partly why I enjoy it. I'll always play, but when you can reconnect with teammates, sometimes, I ran into a guy, Dave Ellett. I hadn't seen him in about a decade. He was, a veteran guy when I was young and looked after me a little bit. So yeah, those are the things that make it all worthwhile when you can circle back and see those guys. But it takes a village. It really did for me because the way we talk about my trajectory was quick, and then it slowed fast because I couldn't stay healthy and I was getting bounced around a little bit. So you need someone that still believes in you, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something about hockey that I wanted more of when I played was communication on the ice. I find that, well, at least when I played, and I didn't play in anything too intense as far as competitive, so it's probably different. But I just found that people wouldn't like shout at you enough. Teammates didn't communicate enough to help you know where they were or what was on their mind or where they were planning on going or whatever. I just love the idea of having a hockey team that's just constantly talking to each other while they're on the ice. What are your thoughts on communication on the ice?
Well, we talked earlier about how you sort of lay the foundation in the fall for what your team does and the way you play, and whether it's a forward-checking scheme or a defensive zone idea, a face-off play, power play breakout, whatever it may be. Those are all things you as the coach implement. And we've sort of, the latest thing with Coach Hamlin was having the players introduce the system. So whatever your system may be, systems are generally just ideas that you have in different facets of the game. We have the players now with video in a symposium kind of forum introduce the system. So sometimes there's 8 or 10 different ideas, and we'll get a group of the veteran guys to like talk about the forward-checking scheme or whatever it may be. And great thing is watching shape.
Sorry, one second.
Do that,
and then you're cutting out here.
It's a
Todd, can you hear me?
Oh my God! Yeah, I can hear you.
There we go. Okay, try again. Sorry. Yep.
So it's just as a coach, seeing that take shape and watching the players communicate, like at a face-off, for example, they have a face-off play in mind. You watch the centerman talk to the D and the D. So I watch hockey for that kind of stuff, and the interactions between the coach and a player as they're going on the ice or coming off the ice, so yeah. I mean, that's the stuff when you have the players take some responsibility for it and ownership of it, then you see that communication happen more and more. I would guess in minor hockey there's not really a system per se, but you would have at the higher levels. But there are face-off plays, and I think there's things you can do with kids that will pique their interests and get them talking more with one another. It's just harder to get a 12-year-old boy to talk than it is a 24-year-old boy. That just makes sense, right? But it's cool to see them take ownership of it, and then sort of toss ideas around together, which is really what you want to do, right?
Yeah. Something I remember that you just said was, you're talking about face-off plays. And I remember in a year, just house league, we had another coach sub in because our coach wasn't going to make it for the game. And Dan Oliphant, I'm sure. Yeah. And sure. He's such a good dude. And he came in and he was like, okay, we're going to do this thing called the bulldog. And every time we're at a face-off in their zone, you look back at the bench. The centerman's got to look back at the bench. Everyone's got to look back at the bench. And if I'm holding a fist up, that means we're running the bulldog. If I'm not holding the fist up, then don't run it. And the bulldog is to get the puck to the middle D, and they're going to blast it at the net, and then everyone's going to rush the net. Like that's this play, right? And I was like, okay, cool, right? And so then we're playing and we get face-offs and he puts his fist up, and every once in a while he wouldn't and stuff. And then it got to like the third period and he's like, okay, we're doing it. Like we're running it, guys. And they're like, okay. And I'm on the bench watching this and I'm like, Dan, what's the point, man? Like this hasn't been successful one time. Like we haven't even come close to scoring on doing this. Why are we still doing this? Like this is so dumb. And he was like, Trevor, it's not about that. It's that when they're getting at the face-off, they're not worrying about the video games they're going to play later. They're not worrying about what they're going to have to eat for dinner. They're looking back at the bench and their head's in the game. And I was just like, whoa, okay, that makes total sense.
Blew your mind.
Yeah, so it was...
Well, I mean, that's part of it, is especially kids, keeping them interested and engaged, right? And so that's all good. I mean, the other thing about when you're working with kids and that you you take a face-off play, for example, and there's this commotion around that. So the players are all looking back at the bench, and then it becomes like you see that 3 or 4 times as a 12-year-old, and you're like, wow, what are they doing? Like, what's this play or whatever? So it becomes a distraction for the opponent too, because it's like, well, what can I expect to happen here? Should I be worried? Like, and so we always like there's so many elements as you move up that there's different ways to break out and different way, but ultimately it's just like getting the players to buy into that and then share it and then work together on it. And you watch it happen in practice. So, we'll be doing a defensive zone scheme to try and get the puck back quicker or whatever it may be. And you'll see the players communicate together, and you'll kind of sometimes just listen in on that conversation to make sure that this is the way, and then as the season goes on, it becomes, less and less about teaching. It's about just following through on the concepts you've already put in place forever. Right. So that's the rewarding part for me, is seeing it all take shape and then really believe it can do it. And that's the battle.
Yeah. So you did say that you got to head out in the next few minutes here.
Yeah.
I have one final question for you that I try to ask everyone. If you imagine the human consciousness is a little man inside your head watching a computer screen, and you know how people put sticky notes on their laptop to try and remember things? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What I'm talking about. So if you could,
used to done that.
Yeah, right. So if you could write something on a sticky note that would just appear inside the consciousness of all humans in the world all at once, what would you write on that little sticky note?
All humans in the world. Oh my, that's a good one right now. There's lots happening. Oh, be good to each other. Be good to each other. How's that?
I like that. Yeah, that's good. That's a good one. That works. Is there anything you would like to say to our listener before we sign off here?
No. Well, you put me on the spot. I just been good to chat with you. Good luck with the podcast. So how many episodes have you done now?
This is I think I have 9 up, and then I have
you got some.
Yeah, and then I have 1, 2 that I've recorded that I haven't edited yet. So you're going to be 12, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Is there anyone?
You're digging deep. You're digging deep now.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in the double digits.
Scraping the bottom of the barrel with me.
Oh, no. God, no. No, I'll talk to anyone. I don't care. On that note, do you have anyone that you suggest? Sorry, you're cutting out again.
Good message. I mean,
hang on.
Just saying that's a good message to kind of maybe end on, that this is what your podcast is. And if you have a lot of message to your viewers, you can't talk enough about, especially with all the things happening in the world. It's a good way to end it, maybe.
Yeah, I like that.
Did I lose you?
Yeah, you a little bit there, but I think we got the message. You were saying that just kind of putting some more effort into talking is probably a good final message. Oh, hello?
Yeah, you're cutting out now too, buddy. Sorry. I'm in my house. It should be fine. You got me?
Yeah, I think I got you now. Is there anyone else that you recommend for having as a guest? Any ideas?
Well, I mentioned Chris. You should talk to Chris McLeod. He likes to talk too.
Chris McLeod.
And he has his own podcast. I'll connect you guys to.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
He has his own podcast. He's tried to get guests in the past, so he'll be sensitive to you guys trying to find. He's a good guy. He runs he's the radio voice, like CKSY, and he does the Spitfire games booth with me, right? So good guy, and yeah, he'd love to talk with.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I'd really appreciate that.
Likes to talk.
Awesome. Okay, well, I'll let you get to your thing. I really appreciate your time. Is there anything that you suggest for me to make this better for the guest or improve the podcast or anything like that?
No, I thought that was good. I mean, you do run a gym. I mean, so you could I know it's about talking, but that's part of being a good coach, a fitness, whatever it may be. You could sort of tie it back to your own fitness experience and how that helped you get into what you're doing. I mean, that's part of it too, right?
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time in the gym.
Yeah. I've considered talking about fitness and health and stuff, but I'm considering doing a whole separate podcast that is just the Form Fit Gym podcast, where I'm talking about all fitness and health and everything. And then getting people on there and not necessarily talking about talking or communication, just talking about health and fitness and exercise. But I'm sure I'll work it in here and there. I'm not really, I just haven't decided which way I want to go with it yet. If I just want to implement some of my fitness knowledge into this podcast, trickle it in, or if I want to make a totally separate one. So I don't know yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I find it interesting too. And I have a daughter I told you, my oldest Abe is at Ottawa. She's taking kinesiology. So she has an interest in the body and the mind. So I probably need your help. That's what I need.
Yeah, probably. All right. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, we'll see you. Thank you, Trevor.
Yeah. Take care. See you around. Hey, you listening to this right now. Yes, you. I appreciate that you've listened to it this far. That's awesome. And that means that you at least enjoyed it, or else you would have stopped it and went and done something else. And it would be really cool if you could share it with someone. I'm sure you know somebody that might also enjoy it. So just, hit the little share button and there'll be like a link you can copy and you can just text it to your BFF Jill. I don't know if you know a Jill. I don't know. Just somebody. Just share it with one person and I will be forever grateful. Thank you. Have a great day.